Welcome, everyone, to what I think will be a really special conversation between one of our very first member companies and the company that acquired them. My name is Stephen Collens. I'm the CEO of Matter. Matter is a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub. We help people and organizations transform ideas into solutions that improve the healthcare experience. 4 months ago, Fibroblast, a digital health platform and one of Matter's earliest member companies, I believe they moved in like the day we opened, was acquired by Cerner, the EMR giant. So for Fibroblast co-founder and CEO Scott Vold, it was the apex of a decade-long journey that started with a decision to leave his law career to start and build a company that matters. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Scott, as well as Cerner Senior Vice President Kim Hlobik, to discuss Fibroblast's journey from inception to acquisition and what comes next. Scott Vold co-founded Fibroblast in 2012 with a vision to eliminate the friction involved in healthcare referrals. He led the company as CEO and chairman from the idea sketched on a legal pad through a successful exit to Cerner in October of last year. And upon Fibroblast's acquisition, he joined Cerner as a VP of Referral Management and now leads the global expansion of Cerner's Healthy Referrals business. Kim Hlobik is Senior Vice President of Health Network at Cerner. She's responsible for providing a connected systems level experience for clients across enterprises, facilities, and technologies. She's been with Cerner since 2000 and has held a number of leadership roles within the company. Most importantly for today's discussion, Kim led the Fibroblast acquisition from the Cerner side. So as the conversation unfolds, please submit your questions using the Q&A function. In the past, for Matter events, we've used the chat function, so we're going crazy this time and trying the Q&A function, and I will weave them into the conversation as we go. So Scott and Kim, thank you so much for joining us and for being here today. And let's get started with a little context. Scott, I'll start with you. What was the genesis of Fibroblast and how has the company evolved over the years leading up to the acquisition?
Yeah, so you did a great job of describing part of the journey there in my intro. I was an attorney practicing commercial litigation and financial services litigation here in Chicago, well on the path to partnership at a big fancy firm and completely miserable. And I looked around and I saw the partners that I worked for who had, had achieved the brass ring in law. They were equity partners at big books of business. We were working on their big, complex, interesting cases, and they were miserable. And so life didn't seem like it was going to get better. It only seemed like it was going to get worse, professionally speaking. And so I started to think about other things I could do. And I always had some questions around whether I truly was entrepreneurial, whether I had a risk tolerance for it, right? Like maybe there's something beyond the law, which I fell into because I was a political science and philosophy major. And, my choices were like go into academia, or go into politics, which did seem like it was a viable option, go to law school, or go back and bartend and wait tables. And so law school seemed like the right move. And so I kind of floundered around looking for ideas for a while, almost started a music analytics business, thought about going to business school, and over time developed a completely different idea for a business. And I wound up sitting down with a friend who became a co-founder, who's a practicing doctor in Chicago. And I sat him down and I said, listen, I have this idea for a business. I'd love to talk to you about it. You might be a customer one day, but I don't know anything about medicine or healthcare. And what do you think? And I started to launch into this pitch. And it was really clear that he was distracted by something and just kind of what I was saying wasn't landing. So finally I stopped myself and I said, what's going on? And he told me the story that really became the catalyst for the business. A colleague of his was a primary care physician, saw a patient, ran the patient through a physical, including having the patient pee in a cup, and got the test results back from the patient and said, listen, there's something in your urine that's concerning to me. There's some cells, there's a microscopic bit of blood that it shouldn't be there. And you obviously don't see anything with the naked eye. You might not feel any pain. There aren't any other symptoms, but it's concerning. If it was me, I would get it checked out. And so that physician scribbled the name and number of a urologist on a piece of paper, handed it to the patient, and said, call this urologist and let me know how it goes. And that was it. That was the sum total of managing that referral. And so the patient stuck the piece of paper in his pocket or his briefcase or what have you, and went on about his way. Doctor was a vigilant doctor who tried to follow up, had a worry list, track the patient, but really there were no tools to track this patient. And then the doctor went on with his practice like he ordinarily would. 18 months later, through being served with process, the doctor learned the patient actually died of bladder cancer. By the time the patient was symptomatic and realized, ooh, I should get this checked out, it was too late. And the patient wound up dying, right? So this was an event that could have been avoided through screenings, through making the referral process easier. And the story resonated deeply. It was one of those moments where like the room starts to spin, you sweat a little bit, because that would have been me. I mean, I was practicing law and I was working 95 hours a week. Nothing outside of my professional career was getting done. I mean, mail and bills and laundry was piling up. I had referrals of my own that I wasn't following through on. My parents weren't great at following up on their care either. And so I felt it deeply enough where I realized that something has to be done to solve this problem for patients. This was back in 2010. So if you think back that far, which seems like a lifetime ago, especially after even just last year, this was like the dawn of quantified stuff. So Fitbits were new. And it really struck me as odd that you could go to a store and buy something to wear on your wrist, track every step you take throughout the day. Or you can, use Google Maps and give you turn-by-turn directions, which were mind-blowing at the time. But there was nothing that tracked a patient through the referral process to ensure the patient followed up, which is arguably the most important thing you can track. And so on the patient side, something needed to be done to make referrals easier, more convenient, and strip away a lot of confusion. And on the provider side, Andrew really articulated the problem that doctors are facing, which is, patients show up all the time in his clinic, at least as a specialist. Oftentimes he had very limited ideas of why the patient was there. He relied on the patient articulating why the patient was there, and they aren't trained to do that. He would scope patients and he would find really serious conditions and oftentimes find cancer, colon cancer. And in talking to patients and delivering a diagnosis, he'd often hear, or too often would hear, God, I got a referral for colonoscopy like 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I wish I would have followed up, right? And in talking through these challenges with primary care physicians, we realized that they just have zero ability to track referrals. And so that was the problem we originally set out to solve, which is just making it simpler and easier for doctors and patients to transact referrals. And we, as a doctor and a lawyer with no business experience, spend a lot of time kind of writing things on legal pads and Post-it notes and having late night and early morning conversations. And eventually we realized through, and I should say back in 2010, this was like right when Eric Ries was releasing, Lean Startup, and Steve Blank hadn't published the startup owner's manual yet. It was all about 4 steps to epiphany. And so we're starting to learn about Lean Startup and customer development. And we had a conversation with someone who was an associate at a VC fund, and he said, listen, guys, you both can afford to spend a little bit of money on this. Go hire a developer, find somebody, have them build you a product, see if you can get it in the market. And if you can and it works, great. If it doesn't, you paid for your learnings. And that was pretty formative. And so we did just that. We Facebook stalked developers, we worked our network. We eventually found someone who helped us build an alpha product. We got it into several clinics throughout Chicago. And through some serendipity, I also met Troy Henikoff, who's now managing partner of Math Venture Partners here in Chicago, but also at the time was managing director on San Diego at Accelerate Labs, which became Techstars Chicago. And so we wound up getting into Techstars Chicago, which was enough validation for me to go home to tell my wife that this had happened and that we were going to be poor for a while because I was leaving the law and we were going to be eating a lot of, tuna and mac and cheese to see if this is going to work. And in the worst case scenario, it was 3 months over the summer and I could maybe beg and plead for my job back. And in the best case, something like what happened in Cerner would happen. And so that really set us on the path. I can go on and kind of recount the next 10 years, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to probably have time to get into all the nitty gritty today, but there's having known you for most of that journey, it's such a in some ways, like all of the elements of the entrepreneurial journey are woven into your own experiences. Like you almost ran out of money. I don't know how many times you worked through product market fit. You had like children in the middle of it, and so like balancing all this stuff, and then ultimately, really found the product market fit that worked and was able to grow it, and then result in a pretty incredible outcome. And so maybe we'll be able to get into a little bit of that. But Kim, I want to turn to you and just talk a little bit from a high level and just contextualize your role in this story. You have a big role at Cerner, and can you just describe your role at the company, kind of the mission of the businesses that you oversee, and kind of what your outlook, and sort of view of the world is from the position that you're sitting.
Sure, thank you. Cerner is typically known as the EMR company, the EMR giant, but we see ourselves as much more than that. We've been mission, vision driven around just the transformation of healthcare in general. And that's how it started with our founders back in 1979. So when we think about how to do that, there are steps beyond the EMR. And we understand that the technology space in general out there in communities is going to be very heterogeneous. You're not going to have the same EMR across all. You're not going to have the same type of system. And so we have built up an organization that we call the Health Networks. And it's around connecting nodes in that community through different technologies, through different services, really toward the goal of helping enable caregivers and enable consumers to create a more healthy community. So, we built a platform above the EMR. I would say it's analogous a bit to a big data platform, but probably not competitive with the big data platforms, but really rides above the EMR and does use data. And also we're building solutions on top of that can cross EMRs. So again, understanding these different solutions that take data in from multiple sources and that run on that data from multiple sources to do a variety of things around managing that population. So we're outside of the EMR space and looking to help our provider clients as they, grapple with taking on risk and grapple with, some of the other regulatory things that are coming their way. And so hence our interest in companies like Fibroblast that do things that do cross EMRs, that are outside of a single workflow. So that's my role, to look for those solutions, to build that organization, and what brought us to Scott.
Yeah, and I want to a little bit later in the conversation make sure to come back to just some of the implications. I mean, the whole world of electronic medical records isn't really that old when you think about it, and so the kind of evolution where we're going and the kinds of businesses that you're describing, I think are really interesting to look out a few years down the road. But coming back to Fibroblast, so what stood out to you? What piqued your interest in Fibroblast and ultimately led to you buying the company?
Well, what's interesting is Cerner's never been a real acquisitive company. I mean, we have a handful now under our belt, but we, tended to be an organic growth company. We're going to build everything. And, our build continues to focus on the EMR, but as we look to build out this other space, we knew that we needed a referral solution. There were other solutions we needed, but we needed a referral solution that lived above an EMR. We had built one into our ambulatory offering, but it really lived within the Cerner EMR. So we started looking, and there are other companies out there that do this, but what we've learned from the number of acquisitions we've done is that there are a variety of things that make it successful. So, we go through and we check the boxes around, we did the technical due diligence, and we liked the product, and we looked at the clients, and the clients, we had some shared clients already and some new clients, and Scott had some great people on his team that were very talented. But Scott kind of nailed it when he told his story. And for us at Cerner, when being a mission and driven based company around the transformation of healthcare, we believe in stories. And so when we met Scott and he kind of started with the reason that he did this, you can tell that the heart and soul is in that company to not only build a company, but to do good, to make healthcare better than the way you came in and found it. And so that was really, we met, we all had a lot of aligned vision, a lot of aligned goals. And to us, that's just paramount as we looking for partners or companies to acquire. And then the other things fell into place. I think the other, looking at a company and all of its technical, financials, operationals, those kind of things fell into place. But that's what drew us to them.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that for a couple of reasons. One, it's a story that from the first time I heard Scott tell it stuck in my mind, because it's just such a powerful and vivid display of a piece of the healthcare system that is inefficient and has friction and leads to people dying. And it's just a really powerful story. And I love the origin stories of entrepreneurial ventures, and especially ones that are as powerful as that. I also love that you talked about it because, there's a human dimension to acquisitions that people don't always think about, and that entrepreneurs don't always think about, and that, in a lot of cases, obviously the technology has to be right, and the team has to be right, and the financials have to be right, and the customers and all those other things, but it's people, and there's that human dimension that is often either overlooked or kind of overshadowed in the process. So I'm glad that you highlighted that. Scott, from your perspective, I think you had several offers to acquire Fibroblast, and actually I'm wondering if you can talk about it from two parts of the process. One is, you weren't just sitting around building you weren't, building your company, and then all of a sudden Cerner called out of the blue. Like, you'd made a strategic decision that it was a time to sell. How did you make that decision? And then as you went through the process, why Cerner? Why did you pick Cerner?
Sure. So let's roll it back to October of 2019, right? Because that's really where the decision sort of started. We had, as a company, we were executing well, right? We were landing new deals. Our product was a really strong product in the market. Our financials were pretty good. But we were still in startup mode. Obviously, we were burning cash, right? We were about growing. We weren't a profitable or break-even company. And so as a team, we were highly motivated to go and achieve more and grow the business more. So what I mean by the team, I mean, the employees of the company. As a board, we had a similar desire to grow. And so we decided that we were going to go to market and try to raise another round of financing, so our Series B. And we were going to start fundraising in Q1 of 2020. In kind of talking through what that might look like, and in talking to, frankly, other founding CEOs and friends of mine and bankers and connections, the advice I was getting, to my board members were getting, was that, if you're going to go raise another round, you all should think about running a dual process, because you create a lot of interesting optionality by having the option to either, raise a growth round and really grow, or sell the business, and you can kind of create some leverage one off the other. Crazy things happen, and so you might as well do both. So plan A was to raise money and grow the business, and we figured, if an offer comes our way, great. And so we had a sort of a soft launch of our fundraising at JP Morgan conference in 2020, which is the last one, which is crazy to think that's like the last time that happened, and one of the last times it really traveled. And things went really well. We had really strong interest coming out of the conference, and at the time, we had some good investment interest. We had really strong M&A interest, which was a pleasant surprise. And so we had a few companies who were interested in preempting our process completely and would have, sort of short-circuited our fundraising and our M&A line of inquiry, and just bought us then. And we did some diligence with them while we were also talking to some investors, and COVID hit and things went sideways there, which was interesting enough. And then after everyone kind of collectively caught their breath after the early COVID gut punch and got their legs under them and started to kind of get back to business a little bit, we restarted our process. And in doing so, we saw that M&A interest was outstripping fundraising, frankly. And let's be honest, like an acquisition was always the end goal of the company, right? My goal, the board's goal, was always to sell Fibroblast at some point. And it really came from the recognition that as important as referral management is, and as large a business as you can build, really, we needed ultimately to be part of a much larger platform, like Kim described, one that kind of lays on top of one or more EMRs, one that connects various networks together, one that provides some sort of data liquidity. And we just didn't have capital structure to do that on our own. And so it just made sense at some point to be part of another company. And then the question became, which one, and how's that going to happen? And so now we're kind of in the spring and summer of 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago. And we were fielding multiple offers for some really good companies. And Kim said it best, and maybe that's the last filter to talk about, which is really the people and how they connect and the fulfillment of the mission. But in terms of analysis and why Cerner was ultimately the best option for us, there's some simple filters that we ran our analysis through. And the obvious one, the first one, the obvious one, is the financial one. As the chair of the board, with a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value and kind of promote the best opportunities, you have to look and say, okay, standing on their own, does an offer, or does a company that's going to put forth an offer, is that offer attractive? Is it kind of within the ballpark of expected outcomes? And then you have to look at that relative to the other offers and say, all right, how does this look? Does this actually maximize shareholder value? Is this good for everybody? Is the price right? Is the structure right? Is the likelihood of close, within our wheelhouse too? And in COVID, that was a big if for certain companies, especially private equity funded ones that might have lost financing. So certainty to close is a big deal. And then the second filter, assuming that all those things checked out, was the one Kim alluded to, which is like, does this company seem as though they would help us fulfill Fibroblast's mission, right? Does this company seem as though it could expand the business with the level of scale that we're looking to expand it to really materially improve healthcare, solve the referral management challenge, ensure patients gain the right care they need? And with Cerner, that was absolutely a yes, right? Global scale, incredible talent, incredible technology, really, a crown jewel type of clients, including the DoD, the VA. So kind of any way you cut it, they check that box in spades. The next filter was whether the acquiring company had opportunities for the team. Like, was this a good landing spot for Team Fibroblast? Were our people going to be plugged into an organization that was going to help them develop professionally, give them opportunities to grow, provide them with a good next step in their career? And we thought Cerner would do that as well. And then last thing, which is kind of this intangible thing, and one that is critically important, but maybe doesn't get talked about much, or is not understood as much until you're kind of in it, which is, is there what's the comfort level with the people on the other side of the transaction, right? And can you envision yourself working with the people that you're talking to about buying your company? Do they seem like they're nice? Do they seem like they have integrity? Are they as ambitious as you are? Those sorts of things. Do you like and respect them, or do you think you could like and respect them and work with them? Would you want to do that? And you're working with good people who are honest and forthright and nice and have a sense of humor is critical. And we felt that, not that we didn't feel that way about other people in the process as well, but we certainly definitely felt that way about the folks at Cerner. And so when you run each offer through, or when we did run each offer through that criteria, Cerner really came out ahead, and certainly on balance, you have to balance them, but certainly on balance, Cerner came out ahead, and that's why.
Yeah, and I love that you're also talking about the human dimension of it, which again isn't usually where people go in these kinds of conversations necessarily, but it's so critical. And I imagine there must have been some moment where you're sitting across from Kim, or maybe zooming across from Kim.
Right.
Yeah, it was a lot of this.
Really, by the way, I think the last time I saw you in person was actually JP Morgan of 2020, yeah. But the world we live in. But so you're zooming with each other, and you're trying to figure out, Scott, like, you've been running your own company for 10 years. Like, you don't really have you have a board, but you don't have a boss in the sense of a boss, and you're trying to figure out, like, what's that going to be like, and what's that going to mean for the team, and what so what is that like? You've like, for the entrepreneurs in the audience, one of the things, there's a decision when entrepreneurs sell their companies, and part of it's financial, and part of it is just how it's going to work out and how people feel about it. But do they stick around, and do they stay at the company, and do they view it as an opportunity to learn new skills and build new muscles, and take the vision that they've been working on and scale it beyond. So you're a few months in. Anything that you can share from your end on what that transition has been like?
Sure. So, like, going back to the last filter I described, and what Kim hit upon, which is, do you like and respect, and do you want to work with the folks that are buying your company? I mean, this is a direct offshoot of that. So it's been great. Look, yeah, I ran Fibroblast. I was the CEO, I was the chairman of the board. But there's a distinction between being accountable and then managing the business, right? So I was always accountable ultimately to our board of directors and to our shareholders, right? And to our customers, frankly, too. Like, they're an important partner in this, and they took a chance on a small innovative company when they could have done something else, right? And so I always felt accountable. And so right now at Cerner, for me at least, there's not much difference, right? Like, I don't have to worry about making payroll, and I don't have to worry about figuring out a benefits plan, or like resetting passwords, or getting the phone calling AT&T, being like, there's a bill dispute, right? That's great. So all of the kind of annoying parts of running the business are out of the way, and there's some great people in various functional roles in IT and infrastructure and what have you that do that at Cerner. That's their profession. And so managing the business is still something I'm doing. Like, Kim is a great manager, and in that she recognizes that we're all adults, we're all responsible, we're all skilled. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. And she lets us run the business the way we need to run the business. And yet, and similar to being a CEO, we're all accountable. And she's accountable to the president, and who's accountable to the CEO. And so there's that level of accountability. So in that respect, things aren't that much different. And it has been really nice not having to deal with worrying about, I don't know, paying the rent, or again, like calling AT&T because our Wi-Fi is down. So those things are great. We were a small company with a very flat management structure, and we were all in the same room. And so some of the differences that we have now that were a part of Cerner versus when we were just Fibroblast are kind of interwoven with just COVID and COVID restrictions and where we are right now. Because we're not all in the same room, and we're all at home. And some of the things that I think are new and different are really just symptoms of the circumstances we find ourselves in now, all working remotely in a COVID environment.
Kim, I'm assuming you don't, maybe it's a false assumption, but I'm assuming you don't have other entrepreneurs who are reporting to you. Is it, to talk about a little bit about that experience from your, point of view? Do you manage the Fibroblast business differently than your other businesses? How do you think about it? And I ask, I've seen plenty of acquisitions that ultimately don't work out because the parent company just squashes the other one and turns it into a corporate entity. I've seen ones where they don't invest and they kind of, just let it wither because it doesn't ultimately fit. There's some change of leadership or something, and it doesn't work out. And then usually the ones that do, there's a certain way that they're being kind of nurtured and run. And just wondering, again, it's early days, but a few months in, how does that look from your seat?
Yeah, so I've seen Cerner do that to smaller companies that we've acquired in the past. So it's been good learning for me personally to have watched that from arm's length. What didn't work, what happened, and we are committed to this being absolutely successful. So those learnings were helpful for me and my group, because it is a more innovative group, and we are coming up with new solutions internally and looking for others to go acquire. I look at my whole team as if they're not entrepreneurs, they're entrepreneurs. So the personality and the way that they function isn't a whole lot different than how Scott functions. I mean, I expect them, and they do think about things creatively, think outside the normal constraints of a big company. Frankly, because he's on our team, we're probably the one to try to help bust through whatever red tape and bureaucracy there is, because we're having to do it for our new solutions as well. So I think when you're thinking about the company too, there are different areas in the company where an acquisition like this would fit, and how you would structure it. So it fits perfectly where we are. I'm sure Scott can comment on some of the people he's met, but they're entrepreneur-like. We have quite a bit of rope, but we do have results and things to be accountable for. But nowhere in here is a desire to suffocate it. There is the desire to grow it. And frankly, when we brought it over, we just kind of brought it all over under Scott. And we said, we're not going to disperse it. We'll make those decisions as they make sense down the line. But there's nothing about, breaking it up and putting engineering and, sales at this point. We want it to continue to grow and us continue to feed it. And then, we'll make those decisions together when it makes sense.
And have you been involved in other of Cerner's acquisitions previously? And if so, how does this compare? And if not, did you have a set of expectations going in? And how did this process look to you, and how does it look now?
Well, the process has gotten smoother. Scott might disagree with that because there were some stumbles along the way, but the process actually has gotten smoother to acquisition and then after. So we're getting better. But in previous acquisitions that I've been involved with, product groups that have acquired a product, the mantra has been we're gonna move it on to Millennium. We're going to integrate it onto Millennium, and we're going to rewrite parts that we have to rewrite. And, you know, that was the approach. We were an integrated EMR. Everything needed to be on this one platform, and we weren't going to just interface it. And frankly, I think we lost a lot of time. I think we lost a lot of great functionality that existed in the company that we acquired, but didn't get built in a parity form on the new platform. And so, yeah, comparing and contrasting, I think, we're going to handle this. I just learned, I watched it, and we're going to handle this very, very differently.
And can you just go back to something you said a little earlier on sort of that historically Cerner's been a company that's a build mentality, that you've approached new ideas with from a perspective of you can build it internally, as opposed to being primarily an acquisitive company. Has that changed in general? And regardless of that, what is it about this space where you decided that it made the most sense to buy rather than build?
So yes, we grew up as we're going to build it all. I mean, our CEO, Neil Patterson, I grew up under him, and he was the entrepreneur that would show in the old days the EMRs, acquiring the EMRs, and he'd call it Frankenstein with all of the interfaces. And so we just said, we're not going to have Frankenstein, we're going to be the integrated platform. And that was a deep-seated cultural thing for our developers, for our people. And so this has been a shift. I mean, we did some small acquisitions. We acquired Siemens, SMS, probably a decade ago now, maybe not that long, but that was a large acquisition that we did for several reasons. But, now we look at it and say, we can't build it all. And the systems are becoming more open, and data is becoming more liquid. And it's easier to do a startup in many cases than to be tethered to a big giant like Cerner. You can get further faster. And so I think coming to that cultural shift, which has happened for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is that we have a new CEO after Neil's passing, and he came from Philips. And so I think it's a different mindset of we'll have organic strategies and inorganic strategies, and we need to bring them together. So I think it's been a leadership shift. It's been a cultural shift. It's been realizing that we can't build everything. And then also realizing that not only can we not build it all and be the best at it, we can't really build it fast enough, because things are getting built out there with open APIs and FHIR standards and these technology words, but things are getting built in the healthcare industry very, very quickly. And so all of that has just led us to think about things differently.
You're starting to talk about, or you've been talking about, some of the trends in the industry, and I think part of it is reflecting just the maturation curve of the EMR industry and the health data industry in general. So maybe let's shift a little bit to that, and then also, and what the implications are for companies like Fibroblast that are still out there and how they plug in. And I just want to come back to one thing, which is, Fibroblast product is not specific to your EMR system. And in fact, your business isn't specific to the Cerner EMR. And to what extent do you see that as a trend from the perspective of the health systems that are, looking for these solutions that maybe sit on top of the EMR as opposed to looking to the EMR to build everything? And then Scott, I'd love your perspective on that as well, as you've been in the trenches selling to health systems for a while, and you've been selling something that has to plug into the EMR sort of inherently, but isn't the EMR. And there's nuances of the same question to each of you. And Kim, maybe start with you.
Okay. Well, I think these health systems, no matter what size, are looking around and saying, I have a systems approach and it isn't all the same EMR. And even if it seems to be today, I want to go acquire these set of physician practices, or I want to go, create a joint venture with, this type of entity, or frankly, even I want to go create a joint venture with a payer. Right? I mean, we're seeing more and more. So the relationships that are forming bring technologies to the table that, it's not all the same. It's not going to be the same. I mean, we competed against some companies that are thinking about this differently, but I think we're seeing it as it's going to be a heterogeneous technology environment. So how do we help our clients make these, business decisions that they're making to acquire and divest and partner and, affiliate with physicians? How do we best technically enable what they're doing? And so that's kind of why we think about, I wouldn't say reinventing, because we've always had this vision of connecting the community, but this is what it looks like. And you have to live above the EMR. And what that means, I think, to companies like Scott's and other companies in this healthcare space is there's going to be a lot of opportunity to fill gaps and to fill needs in this industry that the larger players aren't going to be able to fill. Some of our competitors, or who I look at as competitors today, are more the Googles and the Amazons and the things like that, right? Because they're getting into different spaces of healthcare, not just the EMR. But they're not going to be able to fill all of these areas either. So what I would say is there's going to be extreme need as clients have to deal with, continue to compress their margins and serving populations that, look very different. And there's also going to be a lot of levers to connect into these bigger technologies. They're not going to be closed. Regulation is coming down the pipe that says that's going to have to be open. So the doors are opening to smaller companies to be able to plug in a more seamless way. So I think there's need, and then there's coming a way to do it that will be much easier than there has been in the past. Scott, I get your thoughts. You see this as well.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I think like the combination of payment reform that promotes economic incentives to contract with doctors you don't employ, right? You're partnering with them to share risk, to accumulate more patient lives, coupled with regulatory requirements to provide more access to data and data liquidity, mean that what we see today with this a very fragmented, heterogeneous IT ecosystem will also be there tomorrow and beyond. Like that's just the future. The idea that you're going to have one platform to rule them all isn't going to happen. And so I think you're totally right. The opportunity then is for any company, small, medium, big, to really provide services in that system, whether it's more data liquidity, it's the intelligence to make heads or tails of the data, it's things to take advantage of the arbitrage opportunities among payment incentives. That's all. That's there today. What I'll say is that what we saw the last, couple of years is that the pendulum has sort of swung back towards the idea of buying a quote unquote best of breed. So, when we first started this business, like 2010, 2011, 2012, even in 2014, that was like the heyday of EMR adoption, right? Like the HITECH Act had come out, basically said, we'll subsidize, but you also have to buy EMRs. And so everyone was buying Cerner or Epic or Allscripts or what have you. And that just completely sucked up all the oxygen in any room we were in and made it very difficult to sell. And then, and you had these large systems who are committing hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of, just in price tag, let alone OpEx, to, have people actually learn and train and adopt. And then what happened is I think those got implemented. EMRs do what EMRs do very well in most cases, which is like record clinical data, organize clinical data, and make that data accessible to other people within an organization. But there's just a lot of other things they don't do well. And health system clients of ours and potential clients start to realize, wow, we just spent X hundreds of millions of dollars buying Epic or Cerner or Allscripts, but like there's nothing there for us to send a referral to this practice, this orthopedics practice that's like critical to our clinical integrated network, or ACO, who does all their scopes here, all their procedures here. They're in a different EMR. Like, what are we going to do here? And there's nothing there that tells any referring physician who the best, most appropriate, referral destination is for this patient based on data in an objective way. And the recognition that like it's okay to buy a best of breed solution. Your EMR can't be the Swiss Army knife that does it all. That recognition started to accelerate the last several years. I think will only increase. So I think Kim and I said the same thing, different sides of the coin.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. And Kim, I'll go back to you. And the reality is a lot of people hate EMRs. The American Medical Association and the CEO of it has said that they're basically the single worst thing that's ever happened to doctors. And entrepreneurs complain that they're really hard to integrate with. And I mean, I hear this all the time, that it's just so hard. And there's other businesses that have sprung up that help with those integrations. And there's talk about entrepreneurs going in to sell to health systems, and one of the sort of barriers is often the CIO who's committed to the EMR system, and they're looking at the costs of integration, and there's such complex systems and the challenges of doing that. And but it's impossible to imagine a modern health system not running on an EMR. And what I'm hearing here is sort of it sounds like there may be sort of a trend towards looking at these non-EMR based solutions that can provide technology and solutions that aren't encompassed within the EMR itself. So how do you envision the experience of working with EMRs to change over the next 5 to 10 years, and to what extent do you see solutions like Fibroblast continuing to play an important role?
EMRs, I think they've been a necessary evil, to your point, but when you go and they go down, right? When there's a downtime, it's, oh gosh, well, we don't want to go back to paper, right? So I think that I'm going to talk about the EMR world just by itself for a minute, has to get better. It has to get better. I think, for a while we were building in regulatory requirements and data collection that maybe a provider wasn't even worried about except to get paid. And so that tug and pull is something that we've got to get more intelligent about. And so intelligence and usability, I think, are two key things to the EMR that will have to continue to evolve. But I also think for companies like Fibroblast, who can play a role, the EMR really becomes a data source and a delivery vehicle for solutions that cross the continuum of different technologies. So, collecting that data and being able to standardize it and getting it to, a company like a Fibroblast. And then once Fibroblast does its magic and comes back with the referral information and recommendation and follow-up, being able to feed it back through the EMR so that the provider has it without having to click back outside. I think that's how it's going to work. These companies are going to be a part of making the EMR smarter and making it more useful, creating solid ROI. Not that there's not other solid ROIs, but really solid ROI around managing populations. But the EMR really, the role it will play in these situations is data source and making sure that we can standardize and get that data clean so it's not a mess and we're not, flooding the wire with messy data. And then delivery vehicle back into the workflow of whoever needs it, the physician, the care manager. There's a ton of people that touch. You've been in healthcare. There's so many people that touch the one person, the one patient. And I just think that they're being able to kind of create that loop, hopefully provides a better experience and better outcomes for all of these different stakeholders.
Yeah. And Scott, when you're out selling, to the extent you're involved in the selling process today, and you're approaching health systems as Fibroblast / a Cerner company, or however you're doing it, it's a different conversation now. And you're presumably talking to some systems that are using Cerner's products already, and you're probably talking to some that aren't. Can you talk about how that conversation has changed since you've become part of Cerner, and even going back further, just your perspective on how, again, as you said, you started this company kind of at the same time that EMRs were really starting to proliferate, and we're at a different time today than we were 5 years ago in the life cycle of EMR adoption and the sophistication of health systems at using them and the sophistication of the products themselves. So interested in your take there.
Yeah, I'll take them in reverse order. So the market is just, when we first started the company, a large part of the sales process was educational, right? Like, what is referral management? It's not just getting paid for, it's not just prior auth, it's not just rev cycle. It really means actively managing a patient and navigating that patient through the referral life cycle and a health system or network, ensuring the right data arrives at the right time, what have you. That was all, referral management was a ubiquitous problem since the dawn of medicine. Since there were more than just two people, practicing in the same location and one knew more than the other. It was always a problem. It wasn't until, we and maybe a couple other companies launched that we started to apply technology to really solve it in a systematic way. And so that created this cognitive dissonance, I think, in a lot of the minds of the people we were selling to, where they just didn't, at the time, fully understand referral management to be a problem that needed to be solved. That changed dramatically, not just because of like the maturation of the EMR adoption cycle, which I could talk about in a minute, but it also changed dramatically when, payment reform came in and margin pressure really hit health systems, and they started to realize, gee, we can't live on fee for service forever. And we're going to try to drive as much as we can today because this is the waning days of it. But at some point, we're going to have to take on some risk here. And we better start consolidating our market, buying up primary care practices or buying up specialty practices because they send or receive referrals, and we need to own that whole life cycle. And we better have an ROI on those. That they started to pay attention to where the referrals were going in any methodical way. And then that led into the maturation of, more value-based payment arrangements. And you do see things like, Medicare Advantage enrollment's been up year over year tremendously the last several years. And so risk is now on the top of mind, and the fee for volume, the volume to value transformation is really, top of mind for anyone. And so that's been a primary driver of our sales. EMR maturation has come along and really, it hasn't driven sales so much as it has alleviated barriers to sales. And so again, when we first started, someone would say, we just spent all that, we either have just or are about to, or are in the middle of spending time and obscene amounts of resources implementing an EMR. We'll get back to you in 18 months or 24 months. And then when they finished, they were like, this EMR is great. It's going to solve all the world's challenges. I think it's even going to solve the Middle East peace issue. It's going to be amazing. And then we come back to them in a year and they're like, yeah, it didn't. And we need some help here. And kind of that ran parallel to this idea of market reform, payment reform. And so we get in a situation where someone say, look, we're taking on risk. We got crushed in this MA plan we had over here. We might even be sponsoring our own plan. Our self-insured plan is not performing well. And we just know the EMR doesn't have the workflow or intelligence or reporting we need to manage referrals the right way. So that was kind of how sales have evolved over time. What was the other question?
Let me say one quick thing, Scott, because you make a great point there on how well positioned Fibroblast was to deal with I mean, it's almost like, you know, where the puck's going, fee for service versus fee for value. And Fibroblast does both. And it's going to be able to span that continuum. So it's just the way they've thought about it. They're not looking for the future to happen before we can sell it. They can help you with what exists today and what is going to exist in the future. So sorry,
No, that's great. Yeah,
very
thanks.
well positioned. And I know we've talked a lot, but we'll turn to Steve.
No, it's perfect, and it's a perfect way to end as we get towards the top of the hour. I am so first of all, thank you very much for joining. I find this conversation really quite optimistic and inspiring in a number of ways. One that you know, I hear from Cerner that you know, they're more open for business now to work with entrepreneurs than maybe the historical nature of the company. I hear that a lot of the trends and life cycle of EMRs and payment and just healthcare generally is that there's a lot of opportunity out there for entrepreneurs to build solutions and then find homes for them. And then also encouraged by the fact that, you know, everything that I've heard you both say, like, this is how a good acquisition should look from a strategic point of view and from a human point of view. So I look forward to great things as you continue to work together and with Fibroblast as a part of Cerner. And again, really appreciate you spending the time with us today.